The house is very quiet at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's a silence so thick you can almost hear the heartbeat of the walls. Outside, the world is draped in that deep, ink-blue mist that comes just before the first hint of grey. Most people are lost in dreams during this hour, but for me, it has become an appointment, a sacred window, where the veil between heaven and earth feels just a little bit thinner. Before we begin this journey together, I want to be open with you. To help bring these reflections to life, I have utilized AI tools to assist with the voice, the imagery, and the shaping of these stories. My goal isn't to present a rigid theological lecture or a scientific truth that applies to everyone in the same way. These are simply my personal experiences, my memories, and the lessons I've gathered along a long, winding road of faith. If your journey looks different, I truly hope you'll share your thoughts with me in the comments. I'd love to listen. I wasn't always a morning person. For years, waking up at 3 a.m. felt like a burden, a symptom of aging, or a mind that couldn't stop racing. But then I remember Mrs. Gable. She was my neighbor back in the late 70s, a tiny woman with a crown of white hair who lived in a small yellow house at the end of the cul-de-sac. Every single morning, without fail, I would see the soft glow of her porch light flick on at exactly 3:15. One day, while we were both raking leaves, I asked her why she was up so early. She leaned on her rake, her eyes twinkling with a peace I didn't yet understand, and said, "Honey, that's when the static is gone. The world is still asleep, so I get the Creator all to myself. I don't pray because I have to. I pray because I want to make sure the neighborhood is covered in light before the sun even gets here." Seeing Mrs. Gable's porch light became my North Star. She wasn't a wealthy woman, and she had lost her husband early, yet she moved through life with a quiet authority that made you feel safe. She taught me that prayer isn't a magic wand to fix every problem, it's a way to align your heart with a rhythm that is much bigger than your own worries. As I sit here now in my favorite worn-out armchair, with the floorboards cold beneath my feet and the smell of the coming dawn in the air, I realize that this time, this watchman's hour, is about preparation. It's about clearing out the clutter of yesterday so there's room for the grace of today. I don't know what your 3 a.m. looks like, but for me, it's no longer an hour of insomnia. It's an hour of invitation. It's the moment I stop talking to myself about my problems and start listening to the one who holds the stars in place. As the clock ticks toward 3:30 a.m., the silence usually brings things to the surface that we've tried to bury under the busyness of the daylight. It's funny how the dark has a way of acting like a mirror for the soul. One of the first things I've realized in these early hours is that I cannot move forward into God's purpose if my pockets are still heavy with the stones of old grievances. I think about my uncle Silas. He was a man of few words, a carpenter who could fix anything made of wood, but he couldn't seem to fix a broken relationship with his own brother. They hadn't spoken in 20 years, all over a small piece of land and a few words said in anger that should have been forgotten in an hour. You could see the weight of that grudge in the way Silas carried his shoulders. He looked like a man walking against a permanent wind. One morning, years ago, I stopped by his workshop early. I found him sitting on a stool, not working, just staring at a piece of cedar. He looked up at me and said, "I woke up at 4 this morning, and for the first time in 2 decades, I didn't feel angry, I just felt tired. Tired of being right." I realized that my bitterness hadn't hurt my brother half as much as it had rotted out my own peace. That morning, Silas did something he thought was impossible. He prayed not for justice, but for mercy. He asked for the strength to let go of the debt he felt his brother owed him. It wasn't a magic moment where the land dispute vanished, but the knot in his chest finally unraveled. He called his brother that afternoon. The conversation was awkward, and it didn't fix everything instantly, but Silas started breathing again. When I pray in these early hours, I remember Silas and those cedar shavings. I realize that forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay. It's about refusing to let past pain dictate my future. I ask the Lord to illuminate the dark corners of my heart where I might be hiding a little bit of resentment or a tiny spark of pride. I don't want to carry any weight that separates me from the light. In this quiet, I choose to drop the stones. It's not always easy, and sometimes I have to drop the same stone every morning for a week, but the relief that comes from a clean heart is worth every effort. By the time 3:45 a.m. rolls around, the stillness usually deepens. Once you've started to let go of the grievances you hold against others, there is a secondary, perhaps even harder task, facing yourself. It is easy to point fingers at the world, but in the blue light of the pre-dawn, I often find my own mistakes staring back at me. I think of the words I shouldn't have said, the opportunities to be kind that I let slip away, and the quiet regrets that tend to grow louder when the house is empty. I remember Sister Martha from my old church back in Ohio. She was the kind of woman who always smelled of lavender and peppermint, and she had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I sat with her one morning in the church basement while she was prepping for the food pantry. I confessed to her that I felt stuck, that my past failures felt like a shadow I couldn't outrun. Martha stopped what she was doing, wiped her hands on her apron, and pointed out the window at the sky, which was just beginning to turn from black to a soft charcoal gray. "Look at that, honey," she whispered. "Every morning God paints a brand new sky. He doesn't reuse yesterday's clouds, and he doesn't hold on to yesterday's darkness. If the creator of the universe can start fresh every 24 hours, why are you insisting on living in a day that's already gone?" She taught me that seeking forgiveness isn't about groveling, it's about a holy exchange. We give God our mess, and He gives us His mercy. It's a promise of purification, like a fresh fall of snow covering a muddy field. Martha lived her life as if she were constantly being renewed, and it gave her an energy that put people half her age to shame. Now, when I sit in my armchair, I treat these moments as my own clean slate. I don't pretend I'm perfect, far from it. I simply bring my shortcomings to the light and ask for the grace to do better when the sun finally comes up. I've realized that I don't have to be defined by who I was at 3 p.m. yesterday. I am defined by who I am becoming at 4 a.m. today. It's a quiet, humble beginning, but it's the only way I know how to find the strength to walk through the front door with my head held high. As the clock edges past 4 a.m., a different kind of quiet settles in. This is the hour when the what-ifs usually try to invade. What if the health report isn't good? What if the kids struggle? What if the ends don't meet this month? I've spent many a morning wrestling with these ghosts, trying to solve problems that hadn't even happened yet. It's an exhausting way to live, trying to carry the weight of the future on shoulders that were only built for today. I often think of Thomas, a man I worked with for nearly 15 years. Thomas was a project manager, a man who lived by schedules and backup plans. But back in 2008, when the economy shifted, he lost almost everything: his business, his savings, and for a while, his sense of purpose. I remember visiting him during that time. I expected to find a broken man, but instead, I found him in his backyard, calmly fixing a birdhouse. "How are you not pacing the floors, Thomas?" I asked. He looked at me and smiled, though there were new lines of weariness around his eyes. "I did pace for the first month," he admitted. Then one morning, around 4 a.m., I realized that my worrying was like sitting in a rocking chair. It gave me something to do, but it wasn't taking me anywhere. I decided right then to resign as the general manager of the universe. I told the Lord, "These bills are too big for me. This future is too dark for me, but it isn't too dark for you." Thomas didn't get his business back overnight, but he got something better. He got his sleep back. He found a peace that didn't make sense to anyone at the bank. He taught me that surrender isn't about giving up. It's about handing over. It's acknowledging that there are situations beyond my control and trusting that they are well within God's. In this early morning hour, I follow Thomas's lead. I take those anxieties, the ones that feel like a tight knot in the pit of my stomach, and I mentally lay them down on the coffee table. I remind myself of the promise that His peace guards our hearts and minds. I've found that when I stop trying to force the solution, I finally have the clarity to see the next step. It's not about having a map for the whole year. It's just about having enough light for the next few inches of the path. The clock now reads 4:15 a.m., and the shadows in the room seem to soften as the first hint of dawn touches the edges of the sky. In this transition, I am reminded that faith isn't just about believing God can do something. It is about trusting that He is already doing it, even when the room is still dark. It is a quiet, unshakable resolve that doesn't need to see the sun to know that the morning is coming. I am brought back to a memory of Elena. She was a young mother I knew many years ago, living in a small apartment 2 floors above mine. One winter, her youngest son came down with a terrifying fever. In the middle of the night, while the rest of the city was silent, I could hear the faint, rhythmic creak of her rocking chair through the ceiling. A few days later, when the boy was finally recovering, I saw her in the hallway. Her face was pale from exhaustion, but her spirit was strangely steady. She told me, "In those hours before the sun came up, when the fever was at its highest, I felt like I was holding a hand in the dark. I couldn't see the end of the sickness, but I knew I wasn't holding my son alone." Elena didn't have a theological degree, but she had a doctorate in trust. She understood that God is often most present when we feel most helpless. Her story taught me that my own strength is a very small thing, but God's strength is a fortress. When I pray in these early hours, I choose to acknowledge that He holds the complete control that I so often try to snatch for myself. I think of the dreams I've tucked away and the goals I haven't reached yet, and I place them in His hands. It's like walking through a house you know well in the middle of the night. You don't need the lights on to find your way, because you know where the walls are. You know where the door is. Trusting God's direction is a lot like that. I don't need to see the whole staircase. I just need to feel the solid ground under my feet with every step. Whatever this day may bring, I know I'm not walking into it alone. I am leaning on a wisdom that sees far beyond the horizon of my own understanding. As the clock reaches 4:30 a.m., the world begins to stir ever so slightly. A distant car hums on the highway, and the first bird chirps from the oak tree outside my window. This is usually the time when my thoughts turn to the practical needs of life. In our later years, the definition of need changes. It's not just about the mortgage anymore. It's about the strength to get through the day, the means to stay independent, and the hope that there will always be enough to share. I think of Mr. Henderson. He was a veteran I met at a local diner who lived in a tiny, meticulously kept trailer on the edge of town. He lived on a pension that most people would call poverty level. Yet I never met a man who felt more abundant. Every morning at dawn, he would sit on his small metal porch and scatter seed for the sparrows. "Aren't you worried about inflation, Mr. Henderson?" I asked him once. He chuckled, a deep, gravelly sound, and pointed at a plump little bird pecking at the grain. "Look at that fellow," he said. "He didn't wake up wondering if the grain market crashed. He just showed up and the food was there." I've lived 75 years, and I've seen some lean winters, but I have never missed a meal. God knows exactly what's in my pantry before I even open the door. Mr. Henderson taught me that provision is a relationship, not a transaction. When I pray in these quiet moments, I don't come to God with a shopping list. I come with a heart of gratitude. I trust that He knows my financial needs, my emotional voids, and my spiritual thirst. I've realized that when I stop living in the fear of not enough, I start noticing the more than enough that is already around me, the warmth of this house, the health I still possess, and the friends who check in on me. I ask the Lord to make me a good steward of what I have, just like Mr. Henderson was with his birdseed. I want to live in full confidence that the same hand that feeds the sparrows is the hand that sustains me. I don't need to fear tomorrow's scarcity when I am standing in today's grace. The time is now 4:40 a.m. The sky has shifted from charcoal to a deep, bruised purple, and the stars are beginning to fade. This is the hour of deep reflection, where I often grapple with the why of life. We all have chapters in our stories that don't seem to fit. losses that felt premature, or doors that slammed shut just when we thought we had found our way. I think often of Grace, a woman I grew up with. Grace was the person everyone thought had the perfect life mapped out. She was brilliant, kind, and full of big dreams. But in her 50s, her life took a turn that no one saw coming. She lost her husband to a sudden illness, and shortly after, her own health began to falter. The plan she had spent decades building lay in ruins. I visited her one morning when she was sitting by her window, watching the fog roll across the valley. I expected her to be bitter, but she looked at me with a startlingly clear gaze. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think God's plan was a straight line to happiness. Now I realize it's more like a tapestry. On this side, where I am, it looks like a mess of tangled threads and knots. But every now and then, I catch a glimpse of the other side, the side God sees, and I realize those dark threads were just as necessary as the gold ones to make the picture whole." Grace didn't pretend the pain wasn't there, but she chose to trust the weaver. She taught me that faith isn't about understanding the path, it's about trusting the guide. Even when life feels like a series of detours, I have to believe that no step is wasted. When I pray now, I ask for the patience to wait and the wisdom to see the gold in the ruins. I've stopped trying to demand explanations for everything that goes wrong. Instead, I surrender to the mystery. I acknowledge that I see only a tiny fragment of the grand design. I trust that, even in the uncertainties, there is a purpose being fulfilled that goes far beyond my current understanding. Like Grace, I am learning to find peace, not in the answers, but in the presence. At 4:45 a.m., the world feels like it is holding its breath. There is a specific kind of vulnerability in these moments, a realization that we are small in a very large and sometimes chaotic world. We hear the news, we see the shadows of conflict and illness, and it's easy to feel like a dry leaf in a storm. But it is precisely in this stillness that I find my fortress. I remember Pastor Ben, a man who spent his life serving in some of the toughest neighborhoods in the city. He was well into his 80s when I knew him, yet he had a walk that was entirely without fear. I asked him once if he ever felt afraid walking home after a late-night vigil. He laughed and told me a story about a night he felt he was being followed through a dark alley. I didn't speed up my pace, he told me, his voice as steady as an old oak tree. I just started whispering the 91st Psalm. I realized that I wasn't walking in that alley alone. I could almost hear the rustle of wings. I told the Lord, "You are my refuge and my fortress," and a peace settled over me that was thicker than any shadow. The person behind me eventually turned away, but even if they hadn't, I knew I was covered. Pastor Ben taught me that spiritual protection isn't about the absence of danger, but the presence of a guardian. He believed that God camps his angels around those who trust him. Now, when I sit in the silence of my own home, I ask for that same mantle of protection, not just for myself, but for my children and my grandchildren who are out there navigating their own storms. I pray for a hedge of safety around our hearts and minds. I ask the Lord to guard us from the visible dangers of the road and the invisible dangers of fear and despair. In this hour, I don't feel like a victim of circumstance. I feel like a resident of a fortress. I entrust my life into His hands, knowing that no matter what the day brings, I am enveloped in a strength that is far greater than my own. It is nearly 4:55 a.m. now, and the horizon is finally surrendering its darkness to a thin, glowing line of gold. This is the moment of the breakthrough. In these final minutes before the sun truly rises, the atmosphere shifts from waiting to expecting. I've realized that victory in life isn't always about a loud celebration or a sudden windfall. More often, it's a quiet internal click, a moment where you realize that the mountain in front of you has no more power over your peace. I think of Old Man Joe. He was the local handyman in the town where I grew up, a man with hands like worn leather and a laugh that could brighten a rainy Tuesday. Joe was once tasked with clearing a massive, stubborn stump from my father's yard, a job that 3 other men had given up on. Every morning at dawn, I'd see Joe out there with his tools, whistling a soft tune. One day, I watched him stop and just lean against the stump, looking at the sunrise. I asked him if he was ever going to win against that old oak. Joe wiped his brow and said, "Win? Oh, I've already won, kid. I won the moment I decided this stump wasn't going to stop me from enjoying my morning." The digging is just the follow-through. The victory happened in my head before I ever picked up the shovel. Joe taught me that faith is the victory that overcomes the world. It's the declaration that because I am a child of God, the defeat I see in the mirror or the fear I feel in my chest is a temporary illusion. When I pray in these final moments of the dawn, I am like Joe leaning against the stump. I declare in the name of the Lord that the struggles I'm facing, whether they are health issues, family tensions, or financial burdens, are already being worked out. I don't wait until the problem is gone to feel victorious. I choose to feel victorious because I know who is fighting the battle for me. I declare that every doubt no longer has a seat at my table. I am more than a conqueror, not because of my own strength, but because of the one who sustained me through the night. The sun is coming up, and with it, the certainty that God's promises are true. It is 5 a.m. The gold on the horizon has turned into a brilliant, warm amber, and the shadows in my living room have retreated to the corners. The house is no longer silent. The refrigerator hums, the heater clicks on, and the world is beginning to wake up in earnest. My coffee has gone cold, but my heart feels remarkably warm. As we reach the end of this quiet journey together, I want to say thank you for sitting here with me. Life is often so loud and demanding, but these 2 hours have taught me that we don't have to be at the mercy of the noise. I truly believe that, as we have reflected and prayed together, something has shifted. Not because of a magic formula, but because faith, when practiced in the stillness, moves mountains. I want to leave you with one final thought. No one can guarantee that every prayer will be answered exactly when or how we want. I've lived long enough to know that sometimes the answer is wait, and sometimes the answer is I have something better. But the real miracle, the one I've seen in Mrs. Gable's porch light, in Silas's phone call, and in Joe's stubborn whistle, is the strength to walk. God doesn't always take away the valley, but He always walks through it with us. If you felt a spark of peace this morning, or if a memory of your own surfaced, I hope you'll give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might be sitting in their own darkest night right now. Subscribe if you'd like to join me for more of these quiet morning conversations. As I stand up to start my day, I invite you to do the same. Go in peace. Don't carry the weight of yesterday into the light of today. Your faith has sustained you through the night, and it will lead you through the afternoon. I bid you farewell with love and the absolute certainty that you are never, ever walking alone. May God bless you abundantly, and I look forward to our next meeting in the quiet. Amen.